The small town of Maplewood was known for its quiet charm and picturesque streets, but beneath the surface lay simmering tensions that often went unspoken. In this divided community, people lived in their own worlds, worlds shaped by beliefs, passed down through generations. At the heart of it all stood St. Mary's Hospital, a modest yet bustling medical center where lives intersected daily. Among the staff was Nurse Evelyn Carter, a compassionate woman with warm brown eyes and an unwavering dedication to her patients. Evelyn had grown up facing prejudice in subtle ways, from being overlooked at school to enduring cold stares in public spaces. But she never let bitterness take root. Instead, she poured her energy into helping others, finding purpose in moments when kindness could bridge divides. On a chilly autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled outside the hospital windows, Evelyn received an urgent call to the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, PICU. A young boy named Ethan Hayes had been rushed in after collapsing at home. His condition was critical. He struggled to breathe, his small body racked by seizures. Doctors scrambled to stabilize him while Evelyn prepared to assist. She didn't know much about Ethan or his family, only that time was running out. As Evelyn worked tirelessly alongside the team, administering medications and monitoring Ethan's fragile vitals, she couldn't help but notice the man pacing anxiously in the hallway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a scowl that seemed etched into his face. This was Mark Hayes, Ethan's father, a name whispered around town. Mark was infamous for his outspoken views on racial superiority, often seen handing out pamphlets or shouting slogans during protests. To many, including Evelyn, he represented everything wrong with the world. Evan, one of the doctors, approached Evelyn briefly. "His file says severe allergies triggered anaphylaxis," he explained hurriedly. "We're doing everything we can, but it's touch and go." Evelyn nodded, focusing on the task at hand. Despite knowing who waited outside, she pushed aside personal feelings. Her job wasn't to judge, it was to save lives. And right now, little Ethan needed her more than ever. Hours passed like minutes as the medical team fought to pull Ethan back from the brink. Finally, just as dawn began to break over the horizon, they stabilized him. Exhausted but relieved, Evelyn stepped into the hallway to deliver the news to Mark. As she approached him, she braced herself for hostility, unsure how he'd react. To seeing her standing there, Mark looked up, his face pale and drawn. For a moment, no words came. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, he asked, is he going to be okay?" Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "He's stable now," she replied softly, "but he'll need close monitoring for the next few days." For the first time since entering the hospital, Mark fell silent. Not out of anger, but because something unexpected flickered in his eyes. It was gratitude, raw and unfiltered, though overshadowed by confusion. Here stood a woman he might have dismissed, or worse, outside these walls, yet she had saved his child without hesitation. As Evelyn turned to leave, she felt a pang of hope amidst the tension. Maybe, just maybe, this encounter would plant a seed of change. But for now, all that mattered was Ethan, and ensuring he survived to see another sunrise. The days following Ethan's emergency admission were tense, yet strangely quiet. Evelyn found herself assigned as the primary nurse for Ethan's recovery, a decision made by the hospital administration due to her exceptional skills and calm demeanor. While she understood the logic behind it, Evelyn couldn't ignore the weight of the situation. Every interaction with Mark Hayes felt like walking a tightrope, balancing professionalism with an unspoken acknowledgement of their differences. Ethan, now stable but still weak, lay in his bed surrounded by machines that beeped softly, monitoring his every breath. His small face was pale, but there was a flicker of life returning to his eyes as he slowly regained strength. Evelyn visited him regularly, checking his vitals, adjusting medications, and offering gentle smiles that seemed to reassure the frightened child. To Ethan, she wasn't just a nurse. She was a comforting presence in an unfamiliar place. Mark, on the other hand, remained distant. He sat by his son's bedside most days, his expression unreadable. Sometimes he stared out the window, lost in thought, while other times he watched Evelyn intently as she worked. There was no hostility in his gaze, just confusion tinged with something resembling guilt. Evelyn noticed this change but chose not to dwell on it. Her focus remained on Ethan's recovery. One afternoon, as Evelyn adjusted Ethan's IV drip, the boy stirred awake and looked up at her. "Are you my angel?" he asked innocently, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn chuckled softly, touched by his words. "No, sweetheart," she replied. "I'm just here to make sure you get better." "But you saved me," Ethan insisted, his wide eyes filled with admiration. "Daddy said so." Evelyn froze for a moment, surprised by the comment. She glanced toward Mark, who had been sitting silently nearby. For once, their eyes met without tension. Mark quickly looked away, but not before Evelyn caught a glimpse of vulnerability in his expression. Later that evening, after finishing her rounds, Evelyn prepared to leave the PICU when Mark stopped her near the door. His voice was hesitant, almost shy. "Nurse Carter, can I talk to you for a minute?" She turned to face him, unsure what to expect. "Of course." Mark shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to say thank you for saving Ethan." Evelyn nodded, keeping her tone neutral. "It's my job, Mr. Hayes. I'm glad your son is doing better." "No," Mark interrupted, shaking his head. "It's more than that. You didn't have to care about him. Not after everything." His voice trailed off, and he looked down at the floor. For the first time, Evelyn saw cracks in Mark's armor, the facade of anger and pride crumbling under the weight of gratitude and self-reflection. She didn't respond immediately, allowing the silence to stretch between them. Finally, she spoke. "Every patient deserves care, regardless of who they are or where they come from. That includes Ethan and you." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Mark blinked, taken aback by her honesty. He opened his mouth to reply but thought better of it, nodding instead. As Evelyn walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Over the next few days, subtle changes began to emerge in Mark's behavior. He started acknowledging Evelyn with polite nods whenever she entered the room. Occasionally, he even muttered a quiet "thank you" after she administered treatment to Ethan. These small gestures may have seemed insignificant to outsiders, but Evelyn recognized them for what they were: tentative steps toward understanding. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to improve, his laughter filling the room as color returned to his cheeks. One day, while playing with a set of building blocks Evelyn had brought him, he turned to his father and said, "Daddy, Nurse Carter is really nice. Can we invite her over for dinner someday?" Mark froze, staring at his son in disbelief. The idea of inviting Evelyn, a black woman, into their home would have been unthinkable to him just weeks ago. But now, faced with his son's innocent request, he found himself unable to dismiss it outright. Instead, he forced a smile and said, "We'll see, buddy." As Evelyn observed this exchange from across the room, she couldn't help but wonder if the seeds of change were beginning to sprout, not just within Mark, but within the entire family. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that healing might extend beyond Ethan's physical health. The hospital room had become a peculiar battleground of emotions, where fear, gratitude, and prejudice clashed silently. Evelyn continued her duties with unwavering professionalism, but she couldn't deny the growing sense of curiosity about Mark Hayes. His transformation, though subtle, was undeniable. Gone was the fiery anger that once defined him. In its place stood a man grappling with conflicting beliefs and newfound respect for someone he'd once dismissed. One morning, as Evelyn entered Ethan's room carrying a tray of medication, she found Mark sitting beside his son, reading aloud from a children's book. The sight was unexpectedly heartwarming. Ethan giggled at the funny voices his father used for each character, his laughter echoing through the otherwise quiet ward. For a brief moment, Evelyn forgot the complexities surrounding them and simply smiled. "Good morning," she said softly. placing the tray on the bedside table. Mark looked up, his expression softening. "Morning, Nurse Carter." Evelyn checked, Ethan's vitals making small talk to keep the mood light. "Looks like someone's feeling better today," she remarked, ruffling Ethan's hair gently. "He's been asking for you," Mark admitted, surprising even himself with the admission. "Says you tell the best stories." Evelyn chuckled. "Well, I do have a few tricks up my sleeve. Maybe I'll share one later." As she finished her routine checks, Mark hesitated before speaking again. "Listen, I've been thinking about what you said the other day." Evelyn paused, turning to face him. "What did I say?" "That everyone deserves care," he replied quietly. "I've thought about it a lot. And, well, I guess I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Evelyn wasn't sure how to respond. She hadn't expected an apology, not from someone like Mark. Yet here he was, fumbling through his emotions with sincerity, etched across his face. "You don't owe me anything," she finally said. "But if it helps you see people differently, then maybe Ethan's illness wasn't all bad." Mark nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He wanted to say more, to explain the turmoil inside him, but the right words eluded him. Instead, he changed the subject. "Ethan mentioned something about dinner." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Dinner?" "He wants you to come over," Mark explained awkwardly. "To our house. I told him we'd see, but—" He trailed off, scratching the back of his neck nervously. "If you're comfortable with it, I mean. You've done so much for us. I think it'd mean a lot to him." Evelyn considered the invitation carefully. She knew accepting could open doors or close them permanently, but she also recognized the potential for change, not just in Mark, but in the broader community. After a long pause, she nodded. "I'd be happy to join you, on one condition." "What's that?" Mark asked cautiously. "That we keep things simple, no pressure, just good food and good company." Relief washed over Mark's face. "Deal." Later, that evening, Evelyn reflected on the conversation as she prepared to leave the hospital. She felt a mix of apprehension and hope. Dinner at the Hayes' home would undoubtedly be challenging, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to break down barriers and challenge stereotypes. Meanwhile, Mark returned home, deep in thought. He spent hours pacing the living room, rehearsing what he might say to Evelyn during their visit. How could he explain his past actions without sounding defensive? More importantly, how could he show her and himself that he was capable of change? The next day, Evelyn brought Ethan a small gift, a colorful picture book filled with tales of kindness and courage. "For when I'm not around," she joked, handing it to him. Ethan beamed with delight. "Thank you, Nurse Carter. Daddy can—" "We read it tonight?" Mark smiled, watching his son's joy. "Of course, buddy." As they flipped through the pages together, Mark realized something profound. Evelyn wasn't just saving Ethan's life. She was teaching them both what it meant to truly care, for others, for themselves, and for the world around them. By the time Evelyn arrived for dinner later that week, the Hayes household buzzed with nervous energy. Mark greeted her at the door, his hands trembling slightly as he extended a handshake. "Welcome," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Evelyn accepted the gesture warmly. "Thank you for having me." Inside, Ethan bounced excitedly, eager to show off his favorite toys. As the evening unfolded, laughter replaced tension, and shared meals became a bridge between two worlds once thought irreconcilable. For the first time, Mark allowed himself to imagine a future where differences didn't divide, but united. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the Hayes family's modest home. Evelyn stood on their porch, smoothing the fabric of her dress as she waited for Mark to answer the door. She had spent hours debating whether this dinner was a good idea, whether it might push boundaries too far or create more harm than healing. But in the end, curiosity won out. This wasn't just about her, it was about Ethan, and perhaps even about Mark. When Mark opened the door, his nervousness was palpable. "Nurse Carter," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Thank you for coming. Please call me Evelyn," she replied with a reassuring smile. "And thank you for inviting me." The house was simple yet cozy, filled with photos of Ethan at various stages of his life. Toys were scattered across the living room floor, evidence of a child who brought joy and chaos in equal measure. Ethan himself came bounding into the room, moments later his face lighting up when he saw Evelyn. "You came," he exclaimed, throwing his arms around her legs in an enthusiastic hug. Evelyn laughed softly, crouching down to meet him at eye level. "Of course I did. Did you think I'd miss dinner with my favorite patient?" Ethan beamed, tugging her hand toward the dining table. "Come on, Daddy made spaghetti." Mark followed behind them, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Well, made might be stretching it. I mostly boiled water and added sauce from a jar." "It smells amazing," Evelyn assured him, taking a seat at the table. The gesture seemed to ease some of Mark's tension, if only slightly, as they ate. Conversation flowed surprisingly well. Ethan dominated most of it, chattering excitedly about school, his favorite cartoons, and how much he loved the picture book Evelyn had given him. Mark chimed in occasionally, sharing stories about Ethan's antics that left Evelyn chuckling. For a while, the weight of their differences faded into the background, replaced by laughter and shared smiles. But as dessert approached, a store-bought chocolate cake, Mark steered the conversation toward heavier topics. "So, Evelyn," he began hesitantly, "I've been meaning to ask, how do you stay so calm, even after everything?" Evelyn tilted her head, considering the question. "You mean after dealing with people like you?" Her tone was light, but there was no mistaking the underlying truth. Mark winced visibly, guilt flashing across his face. "Yeah, people like me." She took a deep breath before responding. "It's not easy. There are days when it feels impossible. But I remind myself why I became a nurse, to help people, no matter who they are. And honestly, seeing Ethan fight so hard reminded me of what really matters." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Mark stared at his plate, unable to meet her gaze. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know if I deserve your kindness, not after everything I've said and done." "You're here now," Evelyn replied gently. "That counts for something." For the first time, Mark allowed himself to believe her. He nodded slowly, gratitude swelling in his chest. "Thank you for giving me a chance." After dinner, Evelyn helped clear the dishes while Mark tucked Ethan into bed. As she dried a plate, she glanced around the kitchen, noticing details she hadn't before. A framed photo of Mark and Ethan at the park, a handmade Mother's Day card taped to the fridge. These small glimpses of humanity softened her perspective, reminding her that everyone carried pain and hope in equal measure. When Mark returned, he looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Ethan's asleep," he said, leaning against the counter. "He talked nonstop about how cool you are. You've made quite the impression." Evelyn smiled. "He's easy to love. Both of you are." Mark froze, startled by the compliment. "Both of us?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Change isn't easy, but you're trying. That takes courage." They sat together in the living room afterward, sipping tea and talking late into the night. Mark opened up about his childhood, the anger and fear instilled in him by his own father, and how those beliefs shaped his worldview. Evelyn listened without judgment, offering empathy instead of condemnation. By the time she left, the air between them felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. Driving home, Evelyn reflected on the evening. It hadn't been perfect. There were still lingering tensions and unresolved questions, but it was progress. And sometimes progress was enough. Back at the Hayes home, Mark stood by the window watching Evelyn's car disappear down the street. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. Not just for himself, but for the kind of father he wanted to be. Maybe, just maybe, he could build a better future for Ethan. a future where kindness mattered more than hate. The days following the dinner at the Hayes' home brought a quiet shift in the dynamic between Evelyn and Mark. What had started as an uneasy alliance born out of necessity was slowly blossoming into something resembling trust. For Evelyn, it wasn't about forgiveness, it was about understanding. And for Mark, it was about redemption, though he wasn't sure he deserved it. Ethan's recovery progressed steadily, and soon he was well enough to be discharged from the hospital. On the day of his release, Evelyn arrived with a small gift, a colorful journal filled with blank pages. "For all your big ideas," she told him with a wink. "Maybe one day you'll write a story about this adventure." Ethan hugged her tightly, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Will you visit me, even after I go home?" "Of course," Evelyn promised. "We'll have lots of adventures outside the hospital, too." As they said their goodbyes, Mark lingered near the doorway, watching the exchange. He felt a lump rise in his throat as he realized how much Evelyn had come to mean to both him and Ethan, not just as a nurse, but as someone who saw them clearly, flaws and all, and chose kindness anyway. Back at home, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Mark threw himself into being a better father, determined to make up for lost time. He spent evenings playing board games with Ethan, reading stories before bedtime, and even attempting to cook meals that didn't involve boiling water. But despite these efforts, there were moments when old habits crept back in. Moments when fear or anger threatened to undo the progress he'd made. One such moment came during a trip to the grocery store. As they stood in line, Ethan pointed excitedly at a woman wearing a hijab. "Daddy, look, her scarf is so pretty." Mark froze, panic rising in his chest. Old instincts whispered cruel thoughts, urging him to silence his son or distract him. But then he remembered Evelyn's words. "Change isn't easy, but you're trying." Taking a deep breath, he knelt down beside Ethan and smiled. "You're right, buddy. It is pretty. Maybe we can ask her where she got it sometime." The woman overheard and chuckled warmly. "Thank you. My daughter picked it out for me." Ethan grinned, proud of himself for noticing something beautiful. Mark stood up, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. Small victories like this reminded him why he needed to keep pushing forward. Meanwhile, Evelyn found herself reflecting on her own journey. Helping Ethan and Mark had reignited her belief in the power of compassion, but it also forced her to confront lingering doubts within herself. Could she truly forgive someone like Mark? Or was she simply tolerating him for Ethan's sake? Her best friend, Lisa, noticed the change in her demeanor during their weekly coffee catch-up. "You seem different lately," Lisa observed. "More hopeful, maybe." Evelyn stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness, about whether it's possible to move past hate without forgetting what caused it." Lisa nodded knowingly. "It's not about excusing bad behavior. It's about choosing peace, for yourself, not for them." Those words stuck with Evelyn long after their conversation ended. She realized that helping Mark wasn't just, about saving Ethan. It was about proving to herself that love could conquer hate, even in its smallest forms. A few weeks later, Mark decided to take a bold step. He called Evelyn and asked if she'd accompany him and Ethan to a community event, a local art fair designed to bring people together through creativity. At first, Evelyn hesitated, unsure if she was ready to face potential judgment from others, but ultimately she agreed, knowing it was another opportunity to break down barriers. The day of the fair arrived, sunny and bright. Stalls lined the park, showcasing paintings, sculptures, and handmade crafts. Ethan darted from booth to booth, wide-eyed with wonder, while Mark and Evelyn walked side by side, exchanging tentative smiles. They stopped at a stall featuring collaborative artwork, where visitors were invited to add their own brushstrokes to a shared canvas. "Should we try?" Mark asked, holding up a paintbrush. Evelyn laughed softly. "Why not?" Together they dipped their brushes into vibrant colors and added strokes to the growing masterpiece. Ethan joined in too, giggling as he smeared blue across the corner. As they worked, strangers approached, curious about the unlikely trio. Some offered kind words. Others stared silently, unsure what to make of them. But for the first time, Mark didn't flinch under scrutiny. Instead, he held his head high, standing beside Evelyn and Ethan with quiet pride. By the end of the day, the painting was a riot of color, a symbol of unity amidst diversity. Mark looked at it and felt a surge of hope. Maybe the world wasn't as divided as he'd once believed. Maybe bridges could be built one brushstroke at a time. That night, as Evelyn drove home, she couldn't help but smile. The road ahead would still be challenging, but she knew they were heading in the right direction. Change was never easy, but it was always worth it. The weeks that followed the art fair brought both triumphs and challenges for Mark, Evelyn, and Ethan. Their tentative bond had grown stronger, but it was still fragile, a delicate thread woven together by trust and goodwill. The world around them, however, wasn't always so forgiving. Mark's decision to change his ways didn't go unnoticed in Maplewood. Word spread quickly about the man who once preached hate now spending time with a black nurse and her friends. Some neighbors whispered behind closed doors, questioning whether he was truly reformed or simply putting on an act. Others openly criticized him, accusing him of betrayal. One evening, as Mark returned home from work, he found a note taped to his front door. Traitor. He crumpled the paper in his fist, anger bubbling beneath the surface. For a fleeting moment, old instincts roared back. Anger toward those who judged him, resentment toward Evelyn for making him question everything he'd ever believed. But then he heard Ethan's voice from inside the house, calling out excitedly, "Daddy, are you home?" Mark took a deep breath, forcing himself to let go of the bitterness. He couldn't return to the person he used to be. Not when he'd finally started becoming someone better. Evelyn, too, faced scrutiny. Her colleagues at St. Mary's Hospital were supportive, but not everyone in town shared their openness. During a routine grocery run, she overheard two women gossiping about her friendship with Mark. "Can you believe she's helping him? After everything he's done?" one muttered under her breath. Evelyn pretended not to hear, focusing instead on selecting apples from the produce aisle. She knew some people would never understand her choices, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the progress she saw in Mark and in herself. She had learned to see beyond labels, recognizing the humanity in someone society had written off. Despite these challenges, moments of connection continued to strengthen their bond. One Saturday afternoon, Evelyn invited Mark and Ethan to join her and Lisa at the park. They brought sandwiches, blankets, and a frisbee, turning the outing into an impromptu picnic. As they laughed and played together, passers-by occasionally glanced their way, curiosity etched across their faces. But for the first time, neither Mark nor Evelyn cared what others thought. At one point, Ethan tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. "Nurse Carter," he said seriously, "do you think Daddy will ever stop being scared of people?" Evelyn knelt down beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I think your daddy is learning to be brave," she replied softly. "And you're helping him do that." Ethan beamed, running off to tackle his father with a hug. Mark caught him mid-leap, spinning him around until they both collapsed onto the grass in fits of laughter. Watching them, Evelyn felt a pang of hope. Change was possible, even in the unlikeliest places. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark and Evelyn sat side by side on the blanket, watching Ethan chase after fireflies. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. Mark broke the silence first. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough, if any of this really matters?" Evelyn turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "It matters because it's hard. People don't change overnight, Mark. It takes courage to face your mistakes and try to make things right. You're proving that every day." Her words lingered in the quiet space between them. Mark nodded slowly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I just wish I could fix everything I've broken." "You can't," Evelyn admitted gently, "but you can start somewhere, with Ethan, with yourself, and maybe someday with others." The next morning, Mark made another bold move. He visited Pastor Lewis, the leader of the local church. a man known for advocating peace and unity within the community. Mark had avoided the pastor for years, dismissing his sermons as naive, but now he needed guidance. "I'm trying to be better," Mark confessed, his voice trembling, "but I don't know where to begin." Pastor Lewis listened patiently before responding. "Start by listening, by seeing people not as enemies, but as fellow travelers on this journey. And remember, forgiveness isn't something you earn, it's something you give." Those words stayed with Mark long after he left the church. That night he wrote a letter to Evelyn, thanking her for her patience and kindness. He didn't expect her to reply immediately, but when she did, her response was simple yet profound. "We're all works in progress," she wrote. "The important thing is that we keep moving forward." As Mark tucked the note into his desk drawer, he allowed himself to dream of a future where his son wouldn't have to carry the weight of prejudice, where bridges could replace walls, and love could conquer hate. It wouldn't be easy, but it was worth fighting for. Months passed, and the lives of Mark, Evelyn, and Ethan continued to evolve in ways none of them could have predicted. The road they walked together was far from smooth. There were still moments of doubt, setbacks, and harsh reminders of the world's divisions. But each step forward brought them closer to something remarkable: healing. For Mark, the transformation wasn't just internal, it began to ripple outward. He started attending community meetings organized by Pastor Lewis, where residents gathered to discuss issues like racial tension, inequality, and unity. At first, he sat quietly in the back, listening more than speaking. But as weeks turned into months, he found the courage to share his story. "I used to believe hate was strength," he admitted one evening, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "But I was wrong. Real strength comes from understanding and changing." His confession stunned the room into silence. Some attendees nodded approvingly while others remained skeptical. Yet no one could deny the sincerity in his tone, or the fact that he had shown up week after week, ready to listen and learn. Slowly but surely, Mark earned their respect. Not because he was perfect, but because he was trying. Evelyn watched this growth with quiet pride. She didn't take credit for Mark's changes. She knew they came from within. But she also recognized her role in planting the seeds of compassion that now flourished. Their friendship deepened over time, built on mutual trust and shared purpose. They became unlikely allies, working side by side to foster understanding in a fractured community. One day, Mark approached Evelyn with an idea. "What if we organized an event? Something to bring people together, like the art fair, but bigger." Evelyn smiled, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "A day of service," Mark suggested. "We could clean up parks, paint murals, plant trees. Anything to show that when we work together, we can make things better." Together, they rallied volunteers from all corners of Maplewood. Flyers went up around town, inviting everyone to participate regardless of background or belief. On the designated Saturday morning, dozens of people showed up, some eager, others hesitant. Among them were former neighbors who had once shunned Mark, now curious about the man he had become. As the group worked side by side, barriers began to fall. Conversations sparked between strangers. Laughter replaced awkward silences, and hands extended in gestures of cooperation rather than judgment. By the end of the day, the park was transformed, not just physically, but emotionally. People lingered long after the work was done, sharing stories and smiles under the golden autumn sun. Ethan, ever the heart of the trio, stood proudly beside his father and Evelyn. "Look what we did," he exclaimed, pointing at the freshly painted mural depicting children of all races holding hands beneath a rainbow. "It's beautiful." "It sure is," Evelyn agreed, ruffling his hair affectionately. "And it's proof that change is possible." Mark wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "This is just the beginning," he said. "There's so much more we can do, together." In the weeks that followed, Maplewood began to feel different. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, Children played freely without fear of judgment. And though prejudice hadn't vanished entirely, its grip loosened, a testament to the power of persistence and love. For Evelyn, the journey reaffirmed her belief in humanity's capacity for good. For Mark, it offered redemption and hope. And for Ethan, it provided a future filled with possibility, a world where kindness mattered more than hate. As winter settled over the town, blanketing it in snow, Evelyn stood on her porch one evening, watching the lights twinkle in nearby homes. She thought about how far they'd come, the boy who nearly lost his life, the father who found himself again, and the nurse who dared to see beyond differences. Change wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Together, they had proven that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that sometimes the most unexpected connections held the greatest power to transform lives. The end.